how to go back and figure it out. Okay, so I just got my new fan. It is not as quiet as the 26 decibels it claims to be.
Mm.
All right, let's see.
I'm sitting in front of my window, so I have natural light, but it's also like really bright, and I wish I had my sunglasses on.
Oh,
Oh.
all right.
Hmm.
No, I don't want to cross post right now. Webcam. Don't want to save settings for next time. Stream. Sharing to group. If I could spell your name right, that would help.
That's very important to me.
That's actually how you are most memorable to me. Oh, before we actually met.
I've been accused of being a troll in multiple groups because people are like, there's no way Chasity Dix is a real name.
I think you told me about that. All right.
Okay.
I'm using my webcam, posting in my group, going live. Theoretically, this is going to work.
Yeah.
Theoretically. Let's see. Okay, it says I'm live, but it also says it's starting. So I am now live. Okay. All right. So I'm happy to be talking to you about ADHD and personal growth and polyamory because, a few of my favorite things.
Yeah. I hear that polyamorous people, there's a high likelihood that polyamorous people are neurodivergent.
Right?
People who are neurodivergent don't like societal norms.
So it totally makes sense.
Yep.
So for everybody watching, I'm doing a test run of some back end stuff, and Chasity offered to help me. So we're gonna take advantage of it. She is my personal coach, and I adore her so much. So yeah, we're gonna talk about ADHD, personal growth, polyamory, and see what happens. So Chasity is a coach of requirement. That's the name that I gave her because she doesn't stick to just one niche. She does it all because life is messier than just being able to compartmentalize business and family and personal growth and development and ADHD. It all overlaps and spills together. So yeah, she is a coach of requirement, but today the ADHD hat.
Yes. Hat to put on.
I know, right? If only we had planned this with a little more.
It has so many hats. Like surely there's one within arm's reach, but there's not.
Of course not, but there will be next time we talk, of course.
Yeah.
Like every time, that'll probably be the new running gig, right? So, I have a couple questions for you.
Okay.
So we know that personal growth takes some pretty consistent effort, but we also know that executive dysfunction can just like show up and be like, no, fuck you, we're not going to do that. Do you have any like tips, hints, tricks, tools, whatever for working with your executive dysfunction instead of against it?
Sort of. I think this is an interesting question because I think people are often looking for like, what's the secret? Like, give me some things that I can do. But I think especially when it comes to ADHD, not everybody's the same, and something that works for one what?
I just realized like I'm not sharing my screen, so like in the group, I'm just talking to like this, like I'm seeing you here.
Oh, nice. Yeah. So people don't know where my voice is coming from. This is why we're practicing. Okay, you figure your thing out and then I'll answer.
Yeah, keep going.
I thought you were just like blown away by my answer of not
No, I'm sure I will be. But also
okay. So I think that like saying like here are 5 tips to help you if you have ADHD that are going to help you in a relationship sometimes does people a disservice because not everybody is struggling with the same things. So sometimes like broader answers are a little bit hard for me to give. But I did notice you said the word consistent.
Mhm.
Um, do you remember what you said just now? What did you say that you used the word consistent? People want to be.
Personal growth takes some pretty consistent effort.
Yes. Okay. So I do want to say that especially if you have ADHD, I want you to let go of consistency. I don't want you to strive for consistency because one of the big things that people with ADHD struggle with is shame,
Mhm.
especially around feeling like we are not good enough, like we are lazy, like we can't do the things we set out to do. Like we set a goal and we say we're going to stick to it, and then god damn it, we just can't do it, and then we beat ourselves up. And consistency just, I think, kind of perpetuates that. And so instead, I want you to think about the word uh persistency.
Okay.
Sometimes I'm not sure that the word persistency is a word. But I
I
think
mean,
it should,
it can be.
instead of being trying to be consistent, be persistent. So if
Mhm.
you're like, "Okay, I want to communicate better in my relationships. I want to prioritize my partner more. I want to, be more focused on this one area and not let things distract me." And if you set out to be consistent, there's a really good chance you're gonna let yourself down,
Mhm.
especially in the beginning of trying to start a new habit. And when you start to feel these feelings of guilt and shame, then you'll start to spiral, and then you're not making good decisions, and then you're not making progress. And so if you set a new goal or an intention to be better to yourself somewhere in your life, with a partner, within multiple relationships, wherever it is, if you set a new intention and you do, really well for a day or 2 days or a week or whatever, and then you notice, "Oh, fuck, like, I forgot I even set the intention. I stopped doing it because I forgot it existed. I literally did not think about it at all for days. I wasn't trying to neglect it." I don't want you to beat yourself up about it. I want you to think about being persistent. Cool. Well, this is still something that's really important to me. This is still something that I want to be committed to. So I'm just going to pick back up where I left off. I'm going to be persistent. I'm not going to beat myself up over it, and I'm not going to give up. I'm just going to meet myself where I am and keep going.
Yes, I like it. So, I did figure this out while you were talking.
Okay.
I have to start it before we start the live. I can't start it in the middle. So,
So people can see you,
I hope. Well, okay, so here's what I'm
not.
worried about.
Okay.
I hope that they can hear both of us.
Oh, I hope they can't.
Because otherwise I'm just sitting here talking to myself.
I absolutely hope that is what is happening, and then later you can just post the recording of this, which is why you hit record to begin with, and you can say, "Hey,
Right?
I did this thing and I fucked it up, but here is the recording of it, so it still is providing you value, and I learned what to do differently next time."
Exactly. So
In
I'm
the
just gonna leave it
meantime,
as is
I hope
and
you
we'll
enjoyed
figure
me
it out.
talking to myself.
If somebody messages me and is like, "Why are you talking to yourself?" I'll just be like, "What?
Oh gosh.
So this one thing happened." All right. So,
You didn't hear the voices in my head?
right? They have names. Gosh. Um, all right. So on top of jobs, kids, and whatever obligations that we give ourselves and get ourselves into, when you have multiple partners in polyamory,
Mhm.
um, it becomes even more of a struggle to keep track of everything and like not forget your commitments and not forget that you haven't seen hi puppers.
Oh,
Have,
is there a dog? There's
yes.
always a dog.
um you haven't spent the time that you promised to somebody, or you're supposed to pick up your kids from soccer practice. um are there any specific tools you recommend people try to customize in ADHD friendly ways?
Oh my god, you're gonna love this answer. Do you know what the secret is?
What? Tell me.
Communication.
No.
Yeah, for real. If you have ADHD and you are in one or more relationships, I wholeheartedly believe that the best thing you can do is communicate with your partner about your ADHD.
Hmm.
You need to There's several things I recommend. Number 1, do a little bit of research about ADHD. Go, like, make that a today's hyper focus. Go down that deep rabbit hole and research common symptoms of ADHD. Figure out if you have the hyperactive type, the inattentive type, or a combination, and then figure out what some of the symptoms you have are that commonly impact your relationship, or if you live with one or more partners, like your how that could impact living with them. And then
Mhm.
sit down and have a really open conversation. Hey, have I ever told you I have ADHD? Or hey, I have ADHD, but like I think in order for us to be in a healthy relationship, you need to understand how this really affects me
Right.
and then how it then affects you. So that way they know what to expect. If they see you exhibit certain behaviors, it may take them a while to remember, but they'll eventually be able to be like, this is not personal. This is ADHD.
S-
They don't not care about me. They just have poor working memory. Their executive functioning is not the same as mine. So I can't
Right.
expect from them what I would expect from a neurotypical partner.
So I know the answer to this question, but
Okay.
this is for the people who might not know. Um, don't you have to have a diagnosis in order to have ADHD?
No, I don't have a diagnosis. So this is actually one of my favorite things like to talk about with people. So ADHD itself, like true ADHD, is a genetic disorder, and so it is passed on from your parents. If you have ADHD, your one or more of your parents likely has ADHD,
I'm
and
just sitting
there's
here
some of their
picturing which parent it is.
yeah. um, but when I was, gosh, probably 6, 8 months ago, I was listening to a podcast about ADHD, and she said, if you have ADHD, oh, maybe this was a TikTok because all the good stuff comes from TikTok, right?
Right.
She said, if you have ADHD, then I highly recommend you also seek out therapy for trauma because
Ooh.
trauma manifests and shows up in a lot of the same ways ADHD does. And this like knocked me on my ass when I first heard it. And so thankfully I already had a therapist at the time. And so I met with her the following week and I was like, okay, we talked about how I have ADHD, but I just heard this thing about how like trauma can also show up looking like ADHD. And I know I have ADHD in my family, but there's also generational trauma in
Mm.
my family that has been passed down. And I experienced my own personal trauma as a child. And so, like, this executive dysfunction that I'm experiencing and that is impacting my life, where is it coming from? And she was like, honestly, it doesn't matter. It's like, she was like, with you, she was like, you probably have it all. It's probably a little bit of all of it. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter where it's coming from, unless you're seeking a diagnosis for and you want medication. But if you're
Mhm.
not at that point, and you are noticing that you have ADHD symptoms, it doesn't matter if it's a genetic component or a trauma component because it's impacting you the same.
Mhm.
And all of the same non-medical workarounds are going to be effective regardless of where it's coming from. So I don't have a diagnosis because at this time I'm not seeking medication. At some point, I may get a diagnosis. Um, and then at that point, like the big indicator is in order for it to be diagnosed as ADHD, the symptoms need to be impacting your life and they need to be long term. Like they
Mhm.
need to be symptoms that you've always had.
Right.
No,
Okay,
so
that
this
makes
all
sense.
started in my 20s. Like, were you like this when you were 12? But the thing is, when you have trauma brain and when you have ADHD brain, that means you have a shitty memory. So you might not remember what you were like as a 7-year-old
Right.
or a 12-year-old. And so when somebody's like, "Well, have you always been this way?" You're like, "I think so."
Possibly,
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
I
So,
don't feel much different.
yeah.
Okay. So that's good to know for those who didn't know that.
And especially I wanna say ADHD is very underdiagnosed, especially if you have the inattentive type, and women are more likely to have the inattentive type. You can have the hyperactive type as a woman, but so if you're a woman and you suspect you have ADHD and you think it's the inattentive type, like, there's just a really good chance that that is what it is, because so many women and girls go undiagnosed because it presents differently.
Yes.
And
Okay.
so people just don't know
So,
what the symptoms are to like be able to identify it.
right. Not that this is my ADHD kicking in or anything,
Mhm.
but um did we get to the part where you had the tools and did we get all the way through that? Like
I
I
don't
know
know.
I asked you.
What's the question again?
The specific tools that you recommend people try
Oh,
or
oh,
customize.
I said communication.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
But
So
did you get all the way
communication.
through it? Because I know
Yes.
my thought came up, like,
Mhm.
halfway through.
Yeah, so the most important thing is to communicate with your partner that you have ADHD. Share with them some of the ways that it impacts you, and be open to having a conversation about how that could impact your relationship. And I encourage you and your partner or partners to say, "Okay, well, like, if you see me, if I do one of these things, I want you to share with me, hey, I know this is because of your ADHD, but you did this thing or didn't do this thing, and it gave me feelings."
Mhm.
You need to be willing to have those conversations.
It impacted my life in this way.
Yes, because I don't have a lot of generic tools for people, um, because I think so much. Partly because often people will come with a problem and they're like, "I'm struggling with this area." And then I start asking more questions and it turns out that's not what they're struggling with. That's what they thought they wanted to talk about, but it's really this other thing that they're struggling with. And once we address that and find some workarounds for that, it like fixes this other problem.
It's almost like that's how coaching just kind of works in general.
Right?
I know anything about this.
So,
Um, so I guess that nullifies my next question, but
okay, but
just
ask
in
it
case.
anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say. So if you do come up with a specific tool or something that you want to try out more, how do you prevent it from becoming background noise? Like you put up the
Mm.
whiteboard in the kitchen and then a week later you don't even see it anymore.
Um, okay, that's a really interesting question. So to be totally transparent to everybody who's like watching this, Deana sent me like some ideas of questions she was going to ask me, and I interpreted this question totally different than how she verbally took it. Because you were like, how do you prevent things from becoming like background noise? And I thought like stuff specifically with your partner, not like whiteboards and reminders and things like that. So I sort of had an answer
Oh
prepared.
no, I threw you
Okay.
for a curveball.
Yeah, that's fun though. Okay, so tell me, read the question to me again.
So how do you, if you try like a whiteboard or a chore chart or something like that, if you try like a physical task
Mhm,
reminder type thing, how do you
mhm.
prevent it from becoming background noise that you don't even see anymore?
Okay, number one, don't be married to your solutions. So if you try something and it doesn't work for you,
Get a divorce?
absolutely. Absolutely. Coming from the divorced woman, not all relationships are meant to last forever, and that goes with you
Right.
and your whiteboard also. So if you have an idea or one of your partners has an idea of like, "Oh, here's a struggle that you and your ADHD brain are having, like, let's try this thing." Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. And then be willing to be like, "Hey, it's been a week and I haven't even looked at this. Like, why isn't it working for me?" You have
Mhm.
to get really curious. There's a lot of, like, introspection here, right? Like, there's no simple answers. Get really curious, "Why isn't this working for me?"
And this is why you and I bleed over so much because that's what
Yes,
I do. It's all introspection
yes.
and
So, is
asking
it because
questions.
you also the whiteboard would be great if you also had alarms going off in your phone? Or is it because you put up a whiteboard in a room that you're never really in that much anyway, or you're only in that room when you're already really fucking busy doing other things, and you don't have the mental capacity to look at the whiteboard and focus on the other things that you're doing in that room?
So one thing I did learn back in our old house, it was not set up well, and it was just a pain in the ass to live in. And one thing I did read, hear, see something I don't know was pay attention to what you do, and then put the things you need in place in those areas you do them. And I was like, whoa, like that was just like a total mind fuck. Like it really is that simple when you can figure out what you do naturally instead of
Yeah.
having to like train yourself to do things differently.
And I think it also comes back to being persistent rather than consistent. So, for years and years, I bought so many planners, calendars, weekly planners, organizational things, thinking that I just hadn't found the right one, right? And finally, I was like, what do I want in a planner? And I kind of came up with this little list of what I was looking for. And I was like, hey, I really like playing around in Canva. Why don't I make my own? And so I actually got on Etsy and I like got some ideas and then I went to Canva and I created my own one-page weekly planner and I printed out 2 of them and I laminated them. And I don't use it consistently because I don't even know all the reasons why. Like, I could sit here and try and be introspective and, like, list all the reasons why I don't use it consistently, but when I am, um, having a week or 2 weeks or whatever where I'm like, "Okay, I need, like, a paper planner where I'm writing things down," it is already formatted exactly like I need. So it's a tool that's really helpful for me, but it's not a tool that I use and find helpful all the time.
Mhm. Like, when we're talking and you're like, "Oh, I need to write that down," and look, there's your handy dandy whiteboard sheet
Yeah.
paper thingy that you made.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so this one is kind of more of, like, the emotional side of things that we deal with ADHD. So when you were launching your group coaching that you have going on right now,
Mhm.
you talked about in your sales page one of the hallmarks of ADHD being that you feel lazy or not good enough. How do you think that side effect, that symptom of ADHD impacts when you're trying to work on your personal growth and development?
Um, Great question. Okay, so I wish I could remember the specific term. There's a specific term that I learned on the ADHD side of TikTok. Um, and it's basically where you're like your body is like paralyzed with indecision. You have so much going on in your mind,
Decision paralysis?
decision paralysis, and you can't prioritize what to do. And so you do nothing.
Hmm.
Or you know what is the most important thing to do, but it's so important that it scares the shit out of you for whatever reason. You're afraid you're gonna mess it up. You're afraid you're gonna be a failure. Like, there's, so many feelings behind it that you're too scared to do the thing, and so then you have 2 options, right? You can, um find yourself falling into procrastivity. You either procrastinate doing this very important thing by doing a lot of other important but not urgent things like the laundry and grocery shopping and like going to buy new stamps and like
Animal Crossing.
reorganizing your closet or your pantry or whatever. And then you still have this like big important thing over here. And the whole time you're like checking these things off your list, you like low key feel good that you're doing things, but then you also start to feel worse and worse and worse and worse about yourself because you're still not doing this one important thing.
I
Or
can remember feeling that all the way back to like second grade. That's ridiculous. Like,
Yeah.
holy shit.
or like if you don't have, so if you're not procrastinating with activity, procrastivity, like you can literally be laying on the couch and your brain is going 100 miles an hour thinking about all the things you should be doing. Thinking, "Oh my gosh, as soon as I finish this one round of Candy Crush, I'm going to get up and do the thing." And if somebody walks in, they're like, "What the fuck is she doing laying on the couch playing Candy Crush again?" But if your thoughts were like on a loudspeaker, they would be like, "Oh my gosh, I'm exhausted and stressed out just like hearing what's happening in her brain." Um so I think that's another thing where it comes down to like communicating with your partners, like sharing like, "Hey, this is a symptom of ADHD." First of all, ADHD is in the DSM-5. Like, it's a legitimate neurological disorder. And
Hmm.
so, like, it's not an excuse. And so making sure that everybody in your life understands that, whether it's your mom or your roommate or your partner or your sister or your best friend or your coach, especially your coach and your therapist.
Right?
Nobody should have the same expectations from you that they have from neurotypical people. It is no different than, like, you should not expect hmm, I was gonna say you should not expect your three-legged dog to run as fast as your four-legged dog, but I wonder, like, biologically now, I'm like, I wonder if they physically could.
I think
But,
I've seen
like,
TikToks to that
you
effect.
you wouldn't expect, a friend in a wheelchair to climb the flight of stairs to get to the 2nd story of a house, right?
I mean, our
And so
society.
there are expectations that cannot be had of people with ADHD. Um, so I think number 1 for yourself, being aware that this is really common, that this decision paralysis is a real thing that affects everybody with ADHD. It's just not a lot of people talk about it. So number 1, being aware and having some compassion for yourself. And then number 2, going back to communicating and, like, talking to all the people in your life. Um, and then if it's something that, like, you wanna combat, like, I might recommend, like, okay, well, think of the task that you wanna do, and is there something related to that task that is not that task, but is semi-related to it that you could do? Especially if it's something that is fun.
Mhm.
Because if we can get you some dopamine, then that's gonna be better, and so find a way to make it fun. Find a way to make it enjoyable. Sometimes treat yourself like you're a child. How can you get your 5-year-old to accomplish the task? How do you get your 35-year-old self with ADHD to accomplish the task?
I'll give you a Snickers.
I like Snickers.
I'll remember that when I finally come visit.
Okay.
So, what you were talking about, like, you wouldn't expect somebody in a wheelchair to climb a flight of stairs, but, like, how do you combat, because the ableism applies to neurodivergency too, and there are a lot of people and places and things in this world that will say that you not being able to climb a flight of stairs because you're in a wheelchair is your failing, is your, like, you fucked it up, it's your problem. So, like, how do you fight that kind of, because it's everywhere. I mean, the
Yeah.
ableism is
My
everywhere.
my my reactive self says, "Cut those people out of your life." That's not always an option, right? I'm like, "Quit the job, don't talk to the people, whatever they are, they don't need to be in your life if they're not supportive." But that's not always the case. Number 1, you can't always cut the people out. You can't always quit your job. And number 2, some of these people want to do better. They can do better, they're willing to do better, they just don't know better yet. And so sometimes it takes, like, some patience and more conversations and communication. Um, yeah, so I think it's important to, kind of identify, like, okay, this person or place that is a challenge for me, how is it serving me? So if it's a job, like, is this a job that I need or want, or can I just, like, say, "Fuck you, quit this job and find something else that's gonna be a better fit anyway?" So
Hmm.
again, get curious. And it's the same whether it's a person. Okay, well, what role is this person serving in my life? Like, how are they making my life better?
Especially because we tend to keep people around from a sense of obligation, like, oh,
Yeah.
we've been friends for 20 years, I can't possibly end the friendship now. Well, you can, but
I'm gonna quote Glennon Doyle. I don't know if y'all are familiar with Glennon Doyle, but, I have read her book, Untamed, and I was just listening to her podcast. I was gonna say this weekend, but today's Wednesday, so yesterday, Tuesday, it's like a holiday Tuesday, though, and she reminded me of this thing that she tells her children and thereby tells everybody who will listen, um, when given the opportunity to disappoint yourself or disappoint someone else, always disappoint the other person.
yes, I like it.
So, like, why are you staying in this job? Is it because you're afraid of disappointing people? Why are you staying in this relationship? Is it because you're afraid of disappointing people? Mm-mm.
It's almost like these are the same exact conversations that I have with my clients. Like, because the personal growth and development coach in me is going to be like, yeah, fucking cut them out. Like, why?
Yeah.
Like, and also it is not, so if you make the decision to not put in the emotional labor, to be patient with people, to teach people how to do better, that's okay. Like, you are not required, just because you have that knowledge, just because you know and recognize that they are not on the other side of discovery yet, doesn't make it your fucking responsibility to put in the emotional labor to teach them.
Say to the people, I have ADHD, and this is an executive function disorder. And so there are some ways in which, like, I can't perform the way that neurotypical people do. Like,
Mhm.
my brain literally works differently. How curious do they get when you say that? Do they shut you down? Do they talk down to you and like it's an excuse, like you're
Back
lazy?
in my day,
Do they
nobody had
gaslight
this,
you? When you tell them
right?
you have ADHD, do they start gaslighting you? If so, that's a goodbye. And if
Right.
they don't, if they get curious, that's when you're like, "Okay, well, this is somebody who wants to know more. They want to do better."
And then send them to ADHD TikTok, because
Yeah,
whew, that
yeah.
is like the
If
best
you're
place to
if you
be.
have ADHD and you're not on ADHD TikTok, I will say, uh, not all not all ADHD TikTok is great. Just like,
Right.
not all therapists are great, not all
All
doctors are
coaches are
great.
great.
Yeah, so it'll take a little bit of time for you to, develop your own discernment about, like, which ones are and which ones are not. And then you're gonna start wondering if you have ADHD, if you also, are on the autism spectrum. And so that'll be a fun rabbit hole for you also.
Oh, I know. I know this one well.
Uh, and there are 2 very different viewpoints about it.
Oh yeah. Spend any type of time on TikTok and you'll figure that out real quick.
Yeah. Yeah.
So thank you for testing this out with me. Now we know that I need to do the screen sharing before, and I'm
Okay.
gonna go back and watch the video and find out whether or not I was talking to myself this whole time.
But
But
no matter what, you have this recording,
exactly.
and we can always do this again.
Yes.
And do
I
that.
like this. This has got me into wanting to do podcast even more.
I was thinking that as we were doing this, I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is so much fun. I wanna be
We
on a podcast."
yes. All right.
Okay.
Ending the live stream. All right, cool. Um I think I said it so that here, I'm gonna stop the recording here too.
How long was that?
30 minutes.